Good evening, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're continuing our class in Divine Friendship. When I started doing conversations with Yogananda, which must have taken me 2 years or 3 years to do, I remember holding up the book and looking how fat it was and then how little we'd covered, and so here we are again. But having lived through a lot of these, I suspect it's going to turn out the same, and eventually we'll be at the end of it. This is really proving to be absolutely wonderfully fun. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, we ask for your blessings. We ask for your wisdom. We ask for the heart. We ask that we may open our hearts to receive your ever-flowing love. We are your children. We look to you for guidance and blessing and strength. Be with us. Lead us to the safe haven of your eternal presence. Om. Peace. Amen. We'll start with 2 chants. Keshav will do 2 chants for us, a few minutes of meditation, and then we'll start the class.
May I have the microphone?
Oh, yes, of course. The microphone.
Be thou mine, thou mine, oh, be thou mine, be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. I am thine, I am thine. I am thine, I am thine. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. They have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door. Give them an audience, Lord. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. Those who are in despair, wipe thou their tears. Those who are in despair, wipe thou their tears. They have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door. Give them an audience, Lord. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. Those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? Those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? They have no one, Lord. They have no one. Do not turn them away. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. They have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door. Give them an audience, Lord. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. Those who are in despair, wipe thou their tears. Those who are in despair, wipe thou their tears. They have come to thy door, Lord.
Let's meditate for just a couple of minutes, and then we'll start our class. Om, peace. Amen. So, we are still in the chapter. We're in the second section of this book, which is called Advice and Encouragement. And this letter, which was written on June 1st, 1999, is an advice on overcoming self-doubt. Swami writes, I thought I had given you my reaction to your... it was a creative work that someone had presented to Swamiji. I'm aware of the context of this letter, but I won't identify it more than that. So the person had done something creative, presented it to Swami. I'm so sorry, Swami says, I thought I had given you my reaction to your work. I'm so sorry, I thought it was lovely. I also had a slight hesitation about it, as I have about everything you do. A sense of just what you've described in your letter, your lack of self-confidence. I feel it as a desire to convince and a need to draw support from others instead of just being yourself. It sounds funny when you say that you don't want blank to discover what an awful person you are. Of course, you mean it to sound funny, but you're not an awful person. You're a fine person with a great deal to give to others. You've no call to feel this lack of self-confidence. However, I can understand your problem because I've had it too. So maybe I can help you with it. I've been plagued in the past by self-doubt. And yet, strange to tell, I've never been nervous about speaking in public, which I've heard is one of the greatest fears people have. My cure, fortunately before I even started, was to think, well, if I really am a fool, there's no harm in people knowing it. So I've just forgotten about myself and gone ahead with whatever needed to be done. I often thought, I'm the last person who ought to be starting a community for Master, and yet the job's there to be done, and there's no one else doing it, so here goes. The whole secret lies in simply accepting that we, of ourselves, really can't do anything right, but that God, through us, can literally do anything. Forget yourself. Simply accept that you aren't perfect. You aren't awful either. You're just human. And no human is perfect. And no human is awful. Because we're all children of the same Father, Mother. I repeat, forget yourself. And ask God to use you as He will. Badly, if you get in the way. But even so, He can use you to whatever extent you let Him. Forget yourself and leave the problem of success versus failure in His hands. Do your best with His power and then forget it. Love, Swamiji. Whoa, that's a fun one, isn't it? You know, this is a tremendous difficulty that all people have, and Swami himself says it. He talks about it as being more in the past, but it was actually a little bit of a syndrome that he used to put out too, which was just, how would you say? No, I started to say self-doubt, but that's not really the right word. But just a self-abnegation. But let's just deal with what's here first. Isn't it interesting how sensitive Swamiji is? You know, what you did, the work that you did was lovely, but I could feel in it a desire to have other people support you. I mean, just it was very nuanced, and it was not obvious in what was given to Swami, but it was obvious to Swami. He could feel the vibration of consciousness behind the creative work, because all work reflects the vibration of consciousness that goes into it. And what we're responding to, the artist is the message. That's what Swami writes. Because what we're able to express is who we are. So then Swami just sort of refers to the fact that, you do have a problem with self-confidence, so we have to work on it. And it shows in everything that you do. It shows in the sound of your voice, everything you write, everything you sing, everything you create. It just does, because we can't be anything but ourselves. Swamiji had the sensitivity to see it. And the person also felt, this is the joke, the comment about you don't want so-and-so to discover what a terrible person you are. Swami, the situation was a close friendship. And there was an attempt at humor, but it was humor that was springing from a frightened heart. I don't want to get close to people, because if they get close to me, they'll really discover, fundamentally I'm unlovable, and fundamentally I'm awful. Now, of course, we get very twisted up in these sorts of things, and we constantly put forward how terrible we are, so that everybody around us will have to rush in and tell us that we're not. And it gets to be this extremely wicked cycle. And we don't want to get close to people, but we're very lonely, so we really want to get close to people. So then Swami stops and just talks about how he's dealt with the doubts that have plagued him in the past. And he just says something that's very hard for the rest of us to accept. If I am a fool, what difference does it make whether people know it? Well, of course, you can't be indifferent to the opinions of others, unless you're firmly rooted in your relationship with God. I mean, either you have such an arrogant opinion of yourself that you can just push people aside, but that's not really strength. Real strength is when we don't draw our self-confidence from what we do. We just draw our self-confidence from who we are. And who we are is a child of God. I've often really enjoyed just saying to myself and to others, I am the disciple of a great master. Just like that. I am the disciple of a great master. And Master has this wonderful poem that many of you know. And he talks about, I will return again and again across 1,000,000 crags of suffering with bleeding feet, as long as one stray brother is left behind. I mean, it's a stunningly powerful, elaborate poetic statement of the Guru's commitment to us as disciples. And he says it in such an elaborate way because he wants us to know. He wants us really to know. One stray brother left behind. Why would we be left behind? Because we failed in some fundamental way to be able to fulfill the potential of our own discipleship, and all of our brothers and sisters have gone ahead, and Master has welcomed all of them into heaven, and I've wandered off, and I'm just somewhere off by myself, just unable to find my way. But Master, even for one, will come back. Meditate on that. That alone is worth meditating on. But I've sometimes turned that into a half-humorous but also deadly serious statement of my own, which is, we don't have to be the best disciple. We don't even have to be a very good disciple. We can be the very last stray brother, and still Master will come and get us. Now, talk about a basis for self-confidence. Talk about someone knowing us completely and not thinking we're at all awful. Thinking that we're worth every effort that he has to make to bring us to God. And those are really big words and really big promises. And that's the only basis for self-confidence. I am a disciple of a great master, or if you're not a disciple, I am a child of God. I am a child of my infinite divine mother. All of us are equally loved by the divine. Extremely hard to get our minds around it. But it's the one thing we have to get our minds around, because otherwise we will always be insecure. We will never be good enough, because somebody will always be better. We can always see something that's wrong. We start with our relationship with God, and everything else after that is extra. And then you can just sort of lean back, and just as Swami says, you know, the whole secret lies in accepting that we of ourselves really can't do anything, but that God through us can do literally everything. My friend Shivani, who's a wonderful speaker and teacher and has been for decades, she lives mostly in Assisi now. She lives in Assisi now and has for some 35 years. Her prayer would be, we started out together and we took little lecture tours together sometimes, perhaps more than once, certainly once. Yes, we often taught together. And her prayer was this: Lord, you have no mouth and I have no brain. So between the two of us, I bet we can deliver a class that these people will enjoy. Just as simple as that. You have no mouth and I have no brain. But it wasn't, oh, I'm so awful, and when they discover how awful they won't like me, which is just the mirror opposite of I'm so wonderful, tell me how wonderful I am, because it's a totally distorted idea of self. I mean, egoism is a distorted idea of self. And, you know, we're neither really good nor really terrible. We just are what we are. And so Swami says, forget yourself, accept that you aren't perfect. You're just human. No human is perfect, no human is awful. We're just children of God. Forget yourself and ask God to use you as He will. Now, this is the real discipline of creative work. And this is actually the entire purpose of creative work from the point of view of self-realization. I mean, it's wonderful to produce beautiful paintings, wonderful music, exquisite writing, singing, dancing, all the creative arts, theater, acting, all the creative arts are a great joy. But for people who are engaged in any kind of creative work, the purpose of it is to develop our attunement. Develop our attunement with the already existing divine power of creation. As long as we're trying to prove ourselves in what we're doing, we may even do very good work from the point of view of everyone who's just looking at the work. And it will train us in certain necessary skills of concentration and of focus, and even of the techniques of our particular art. It's not that it will be worthless. But from the point of view of enduring happiness and enduring attunement with God, and from the point of view of our ultimate God realization, the purpose of creative work is to transcend the preoccupation with the egoic self so that the true Creator can work through us. And when the true Creator is working through us, there's just this tremendous sense of freedom, and in a way the work is always perfect. The work is always perfect because it's not about the outward perfection, it's about the inner vibration that we put into it. And whenever, in my little creative efforts over the course of the years, whenever I know that I have attuned myself to the best of my ability, and there's not the slightest pretense that everything I do, God has done through me. But just when I know that to the best of my ability, I have stopped thinking about myself and have thought only about the flow of energy and the beauty that is possible by letting God express Himself. First of all, it's joyous in a extremely uplifted but simultaneously calm manner, because there's no ego to get all excited about it. And the work is always satisfying. And the other part of it is, I feel completely free and undefensive about it. There can be a certain hesitation of, bringing your baby out for the first time and letting everyone see. But after that, there's just this feeling of, well, it was simply done. And maybe I was there when it was created, but it was done. It had a life of its own. And there's no question of good or bad or me or it. It's just, it was born, it was done. And that's what we're working for. You know, of course we're not perfect. We're neither perfect nor awful. And yes, on my own I can't do much of anything. But just as Swami said, but through me God can do everything. That's what we're working with. The creative arts, being a creative artist in a divine way, is one of Swami Kriyananda's specific gifts to us as devotees for Dwapara Yuga. And it promises a tremendous flowering of art in all its forms, and a tremendous flowering of the artistic side of all of us as devotees. But it's a work in progress, and each one of us needs to take it deeply to heart and find the way in which the benefit of that flow of energy, that we can step into that river of grace and let it transform us. So, now this letter, the summary of this is, a devotee objected to Swamiji sharing statements in her letter critical of him with other Ananda leaders. And this is May 19th. It happens to be Swami's birthday, May 19th, in the year 2000. Dear whoever, apparently it was a she, and I don't know anything about the backstory of this, so we're all in this one together. I don't know what to say. Swami starts his letter. I don't know what to say. If I've offended you, I am very sorry. That was nice of Swami. You see, he starts with an apology. If I've offended you, I'm very sorry. As you'll go on to see, he's sorry for offending her. Will it change me? Meaning that now that you've criticized me, point out what you think is my error. Will it change me? I'm sorry to have to disappoint you, but I must be honest. No, it will not. It's a very interesting beginning. I don't know what to say. If I've offended you, I'm sorry. Will your criticism of me make me behave differently? No, I'm not going to. I have to be honest with you. Swami then goes on to say, when I have principles to share with my friends and fellow ministers, I don't hesitate. I feel it is good to share them. In that way we all learn. I too learn. I try to keep names out of it. So he's explaining that there was something in her letter that he thought would be beneficial of all, so he shared it. Because he says, when I have something, a principle to share with my friends, he's helping us all learn. And this is Exhibit A that illustrated something apparently. If I had thought of your communication as confidential, I certainly would have kept it that way. Since it involved, as I recall, he says, since it involved, as I recall, a criticism of me and what I said publicly, I felt that it would be good to get feedback, if only for the sake of my own more effective teaching, which I am always eager to improve. So since the letter was a criticism of him, he thought he had the freedom to share it, because if he would be the one who'd want to keep it confidential. Apparently, whoever this was didn't want anyone else to know that she was criticizing him. Then Swami goes on, and Swami explains why he did it. Because somebody has said something negative about me, and I want to know if it's true. Swami was exceedingly unprotective. He often said, I'm here to get over my ego, I'm not here to protect it. I mean, the natural thing for a person to do if they get a letter criticizing them is to hide it. The last thing you expect is to bring it out, and apparently what was quite a public meeting, that so-and-so said this about me, what do you think? And I don't remember whether I was there or whether I said anything. It's in 2000, I wasn't likely to have been there. So Swami then goes on, my interest now, though, is to create harmony and to help you. Okay, so the issue's been dealt with. I didn't mean to offend you, but I guess I did. But I'm not going to be any different. You haven't persuaded me that I should be different. I have a right to share with my friends what I think will help them. However, now, all of that has been dealt with in the past. My interest now is to create harmony and to help you. Harmony can come if we recognize that, though our ideas differ, we are friends anyway. and we both love the same truths and both love God. This kind of harmony I am ever seeking. So Swamiji explains, what the basis of harmony is. I did something you didn't like. I have no intention of changing. You expressed yourself to me. I did what I wanted to do with that letter. So obviously, we have lots of points on which we disagree. But Swami just says, I don't see why that should divide us. Just because we disagree, we're both sincere, we're both seeking truth, we're both seeking God. That's the real basis of friendship. Everything else is superficial to that. But then he puts one more paragraph in. What your letter seems to be trying to do is make me feel guilty. Guilty for his original behavior, I don't know. Guilty for sharing the letter when she didn't think that was the right thing to do. Whoever she is, she doesn't approve of much that Swami does. He said, I don't think guilt can be a basis for any sort of harmony, and surely not the basis of any real friendship, which is what I'd like in this case. So there's a little bit of strong medicine in here. Exactly how, not having the original letter from her in my hand, I don't know. The purpose of your letter seems to be trying to make me feel guilty, to make me feel ashamed of what I've done. He said, I don't think that's to try to make someone feel guilty for what they've done, to feel like they're a bad person and they misbehaved is quite different than trying to tell them something that with the intention of encouraging them to rise above it. There would be a nuance in the letter that would be obvious if we had the original letter in front of us. But Swami, let me just think if I can make that more clear, because I'm actually curious myself. If you really want someone to improve, you approach them with compassion, and you approach them with the expectation that their intentions were good, and that they just, and that they're eager to hear something helpful. If you approach it with someone to make them feel guilty, it would probably come from you. I'm not sure I can bring that to a clearer focus. If it comes to my mind exactly what that difference would be, I'll try to think about it. And if any of you think of it, send me an email. At the end, he says, you have my sincere best wishes in spiritual friendship, in divine friendship. I guess when you want somebody to feel guilty, you want them to feel that they're a bad person. You want them to apologize. You want them to bow down in front of you and beg for your forgiveness. If you try to make someone feel guilty, you're standing in a somewhat superior position to them. I would think, I'm the righteous one and you're the guilty one. That would probably be what he was talking about. And that's not really the basis of friendship. I'm righteous, you're bad, you owe me an apology. I'm correct, you're wrong, you owe me an apology. In another context completely, in the middle of our litigation, when Swami was accused of certain bad behaviors, and someone in the community said, you owe the community an apology. And Swami said, absolutely not. He said, my personal life is between me and God. It's not between me and you. He said, I don't live my life for you to approve or disapprove of it. So I think that's what he was talking about. It's like, yes, of course, and he freely admitted he didn't pretend that his behavior was blameless, but he also said, I've done the very best I can, and I've learned, and I've accomplished, and I've overcome, and I've transcended, and as he put it, he said, I'm quite proud of my life. I'm not guilty about it, and I'm not going to apologize for it. He was really adamant on the point. So I think that's what he's hearing here, this sense of superiority and judgment. And well, judgment itself is a question of guilt, isn't it? You judge someone guilty. So judgmentalness, superiority, the belief that you ought to behave because why? You ought to behave right according to my standards for my sake. And that's not a basis for friendship. He's correct on that. Very interesting. There's so much subtlety in these letters. So now, this person is asking whether to join the monastery, whether this person's artistic endeavors would be more greatly realized in a monastic lifestyle. So Swami writes, this is written about 1973, so this was very early in Ananda's reality. I think you are right to give your time to your creative work in yoga. You have a talent and ought to express it. The path of creativity and also the path to God are lonely paths, but at the same time, much more fulfilling than human involvements, especially now that you've had your satisfactions as well as frustrations from the latter. So even though in 1973 a great many Ananda members were not that old, perhaps this was from somebody outside the community, because very few of us had had our satisfactions or frustrations at that point. But I'm just guessing. I have no idea who this letter was or the context. But the question is a universal one. The path of creativity and also the path to God are lonely paths because much has to be sacrificed both for art and for spiritual search. We can't follow many paths simultaneously. But at the same time, much more fulfilling than human involvements. And now that you've had some experience and you're not just living on a theory, it really seems to me that human partnership and all the energy that would demand of you would now have the effect of pulling you down, where at one time it may have been a necessary release. The implication here is he's talking to some older devotee. I mean, that would be the kind of thing Swami would say to someone who is at least in their 40s. You know, at one time it's a necessary release, but now you don't need it anymore. You've been through it. You feel inwardly that you have something else to accomplish, and I think your real frustration now would lie in not having the freedom and the time to accomplish it. Indeed, despite what the world says, it is amazing how much time is completely wasted in interpersonal relationships. Well, there's Swami's point of view, isn't it? To say he was not a romantic was putting it very, very mildly. Then he says, well, this is somebody who doesn't live at Ananda. Do visit us sometimes. Perhaps you'd even like to live here, where you'd find friends who would add to your spiritual and creative energy instead of draining it by drawing it to themselves in divine friendship. So that is really a fun letter, now that I've read to the end of it and realized this is written by somebody from the outside the community. The implication is this person is at least past the middle of their life, conceivably toward the end of it. You can sort of picture the whole thing. You know, this is somebody who's a poet, an artist, a writer, a filmmaker, you have no idea who probably has had some crash and burn experiences in relationships, now has found the spiritual path, and also has gone far enough in life to realize that if they don't begin to concentrate on whatever creative talent they have, it's not going to manifest itself. I mean, when we're young, when we're at the beginning of our incarnation, let me put it that way, in the earlier part of our incarnation, if we have some seeming talent and some ambition to express that talent, there's just this feeling that it's just going to happen, you know, that somehow it's going to work out. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, these are my plans. And very few of us have any idea sort of what concentrated energy is required to do really good work, and how much tapasya is required to do really good work. And by tapasya, what I mean is focus. And tapasya is often described as austerity, but what tapasya really is focusing our energy and disciplining ourselves away from that which drains energy from the main event. In other words, gathering energy to accomplish a specific goal. Whenever a hero goes on a great quest, he always does penance first to gather that power. And so it is, if we really wish to accomplish in this world, we cannot just let our energy flow in every direction. There's a beautiful anecdote from one of the great violinists, I don't remember who it was, but after the performance, one of the fans just said breathlessly to him, "Oh, I would give my life to be able to play the violin like that." And the violinist just looked at him very seriously and said, "I have." And that is the answer. You know, you've been out doing whatever you felt like doing. I've been practicing my violin. I remember hearing about the life of some world-class athlete, and he described his regimen, his workout plan, his diet plan, you know, just exactly how his life was divided up and how many hours a day he spent. And he said, this is what I do, not most of the time. This is what I do every day. This is what I do on my birthday. This is what I do on Christmas. This is what I do on my wedding anniversary. He said, this is what I do. And this is why I am what I am. So there comes a point in life after enough time has gone by, if we haven't already put our focus down like that, where we begin to realize that if I don't concentrate, I'm going to die with this unfulfilled. And a certain determination, which can also be a certain anxiety, begins to set in. And so now this individual, probably, I'm just looking at this, has looked back and realized how presumably romantic involvements have complicated his life and distracted him because of the longing, the attention, the satisfaction, and the frustration, which is sort of all of the whole story. Once again, in the earlier part of our lives, we just don't have, unless we're born with more wisdom than some of us are born with, we just don't understand how these things are going to play out. You know, we just don't understand. So by the middle or the end of our lives, we see that tapasya is required. You know, it would be nice to have this, it would be nice to have that, it would be lovely to have this, but if I really wish to accomplish, tapasya is required. I have to gather energy from where it might otherwise be dissipated and focus it. That's when he speaks of God realization and the creative path can both be lonely because we simply can't do everything. You know, the energy has to come from somewhere. But, he says, much more fulfilling in the end than these other involvements. Especially, he says, now that you've had some satisfaction. In other words, now that you really know, you're not just guessing. You're not just sort of affirming an attitude. You actually have real experience. And that's where he says also, it's not necessary for you anymore. There may have been a time in your life, the phrase he uses, when it has been a necessary release. Whether he was talking about an emotional release, whether he was talking about sexuality, it's not clear and it's not necessary to know. But in other words, sometimes, and this is what it's about, sometimes if the tapasya is too much, you know, if someone tries to sacrifice too much in their life, it doesn't make them stronger because the tension created is too much. And so even if ideally one would like to have this monastic life and have the only God be my art, it just might be an affirmation that's beyond the emotional maturity. But after the experiences are there, after time has passed, after the body changes and all those things, then, you know, the inclination to need that kind of relationship can be more objectively understood compared to the desire to create and to find God, both of those things. So, and then Swami says, but come here, because, you know, here you could have real friends. Because, of course, often the desire for a romantic relationship is not really that as so much as the desire for deep friendship. And in the world at large, unfortunately, romantic relationships and friendship, it's not hard. It's hard to have good friends. It's hard to have the kind of friends that community can give you, because shared idealism is the real basis for lasting friendship. And finding kindred spirits is not always so easy. When you come into the Ananda environment, everybody is a kindred spirit, because you're all united by that shared aspiration. So instead of people pulling you away from your ideals, their company moves you closer to it. So, to a devotee, Ananda was helping secure parole from prison. And eventually this person was paroled. I happen to know this was a woman, and she had been, I think she was, let's see, I believe she was innocent of the crime for which she was convicted, but she was embroiled with the people who did commit it. So it was a very complicated situation. She was in prison for a long time, but eventually released. And during the time that she was in prison, she became involved with many people at Ananda, became very serious about the spiritual path. So it was June 24th, 2003. So Swami writes, I want first to thank you for your kind thoughtfulness in sending me that present. I was very touched. Second, I want to suggest an attitude I think would help you in dealing with your present situation, which I hope isn't as hopeless as it looks at present. Thirdly, I wanted to plead with you for a certain person in the Ananda community who has been deeply hurt by your anger toward her. What had happened was the prisoner, the woman in prison, in one way, there was another woman at Ananda who had ended up being her primary contact and was doing what she could, everything she could. She was actually working very hard to help her gain her release. What exactly that service was and how she was working, I don't know. But the woman in prison became very angry, feeling that the Ananda girl wasn't doing enough, wasn't supporting her strongly enough, and she allowed her frustration to come out. So Swami says, now, thirdly, I want to plead with you for this other girl who has been deeply hurt by your anger toward her. She has been a true friend to you and wants the best for you. There's a limit, however, to how much she can do, as she has many other calls on her time. Nonetheless, she's been extremely anxious on your behalf. The latest word she gave me just a couple of days ago is that the pro bono lawyer does want to help you. So apparently we were being, Ananda and this girl particularly, were being the prisoner's contact in order to get a lawyer to work with her for free, to get her out of prison. So obviously we were completely, and this friend was completely devoted to helping her. But if you're locked inside of prison and you don't think you're ever getting out, your emotions run away with you. So then Swami, scolds her slightly for being impatient. However, I still want to say that the wisest attitude would be to rely on God, not on any outer person or event. God is the real power in the universe. If He doesn't come through for you, your wisest attitude will be to try to adjust your thinking to the possibility of being where you are for your whole life. Because she was in a life sentence. Not pleasant, but if it happens that way, it can only be karmic. What I've found in my life is that when I really adopted that attitude, suddenly everything worked out for me as I'd wanted it to, and quickly. I wish you all the best, and I pray sincerely that you will be able to come out soon. Love in Master. And eventually that person was paroled. Wow. Here it is. This person is wrongly incarcerated in a prison. We're trying to help. When I say we, I use the collective we for all of Ananda, whoever's specific. We're doing everything we can. We're trying to get her a lawyer. We're trying to get her out of prison. She becomes angry because she doesn't think we're doing enough. Hurts the feelings of the person who's trying to help her. It's a bad situation she's in. However, Swami says, even though we're doing our best for you, don't rely on us. Because don't rely on us. God is the power of the universe. So what he's saying to her is, use this situation to become truly free. And, it would have been easy to say to her, don't worry, we've got the lawyer, we're going to make it work, we're going to do everything we can for you, We understand. We're so sorry for your situation. We know you're suffering. Swamiji, when he was giving us, as young ministers and trying to help people spiritually, some of the advice he gave once for counseling was very interesting. He said, obviously, you should be compassion. Well, compassion is different. You should be sympathetic with people. You should, feel what they're suffering and have sympathy for what they're suffering. Have compassion for what they're suffering. He said, so you should be sympathetic, but not too much. I mean, it's just sort of like, not too much. He said, because if you sympathize with them too much, it will only increase the idea in their mind that they have a really big problem and they're justified in suffering in it. And how is that helpful to them? You want them to feel strong. You want them to know that you know what they're feeling. That's compassion, that's kindness, but not too much. Oh, you poor thing. Oh, it must be so difficult. It must be so hard for you. I can only imagine what you're suffering. The person says, yes, yes, that's how I feel. That's how I feel. You have to be very careful with that, because they could walk away feeling de-energized or even more committed to their misery when they come to you really to be lifted out of it. So here's Swamiji. He says first, thank you for your present. It was a beautiful present. Now I want to suggest something to you, which that I hope you'll get free. I hope it's not so bad. And then Swami says also, see, here's the difference between guilt. He doesn't say to her, thirdly, how ungrateful you are to be mad at so-and-so and she's working so hard for you. Instead, he says, because in the other letter, what's the difference between trying to make a person feel guilty and try to help them? Swami says, I want to plead with you for this other girl who has been deeply hurt. I want to plead with you on her behalf. So he's not even saying that you behaved badly. He says, I'm asking you to, to be kinder to her, to forgive her, because she's been hurt. And then he goes on to say, she's working hard for you. He implies that her anger was unjustified, but he never articulates it. See how very careful that is? I know Swamiji once was talking to me, and he was just giving me a suggestion about what to say or how to say something to someone, and he was explaining to me. He was explaining to me a situation that I needed to know about. And he said, so I said such and so, Swami said about himself. I said such and so to this person. But then he corrected himself. He said, except I didn't say it like that, because that sounds accusatory, and I never speak to anyone in an accusatory manner. Whoa, I never forgot that. I never accuse someone of being wrong. How dare you speak like that? I never accuse. Accusatory is a very interesting word, because you accuse someone of something, you're assuming their guilt. He says, I never speak in an accusatory manner. So here, this woman, and I remember the situation, she really flipped out a little bit and really hurt this other gal's feelings because she was working so hard. I will plead with you for so-and-so. He's just taking her side as a friend, but he's not against the woman in prison. But then he says, basically the next paragraph is, I'm not actually going to cut you any slack just because you're in prison for life for a crime you didn't commit. Just like, too bad. I mean, he's been compassionate, he's been kind. You don't feel anything inappropriate. But he doesn't give her any space because he knows that she would not be in prison if it wasn't what she needed. So he says, we're going to help you, but don't rely on us. And you see how tempting it would be to say, we're your friends, we're going to stick with you. I mean, there's just so many other things he could have said. He didn't say any of them. I'm going to give you an attitude that you need to have. I want to suggest an attitude that would help you in dealing with your situation, which is to rely on God, not on any other outer person or event. Not your pro bono lawyer, not us, Swami Kriyananda, not me, not to rely on getting out of prison. God is the real power. If he doesn't come through for you, meaning letting you out of prison, your wisest attitude will be to adjust your thinking to the possibility that you're never getting out of prison. That is a really, really, really big demand, because if you don't get out of prison, you have to assume that it's God's will for you, because it's the karma that I have to face. So might as well go all the way to there, because the other side of it is, when Swami says, whenever I adjust my thinking that way, I usually find that everything else follows from that. And you know, I've been involved myself in a complicated karmic situation for a year and a half now. And I and everyone who's in it, I mean, our attitude, the objective solutions are still not obvious. But we joke, whatever it is that we're supposed to be learning about adjusting our attitudes, let's all learn it as quickly as we can. And so you can't become detached, because as soon as you become detached, you'll get what you want. That's, God is not fooled. That's clever, but it doesn't work. You have to become truly surrendered. You have to solve every problem that you have in life. Anything that makes you uneasy is always a lack of enough faith in God. God is the only power in the universe. And it's actually quite fun, because then everything gets quite simple, And usually what we're supposed to do becomes more obvious to us. I in the situation I've been in, and I said that it's not so much, I've had to realize I need more faith in God, that's a fact. But I've also said part of the problem is just having to make decisions and not being quite sure what is right. But not having enough faith in God clouds the mind, because it creates emotion. And when you have emotion and you have desires and you have fears and likes and dislikes, it's just a lot harder to get intuition. So the freer you get in your heart, deeper and freer. There's a condition there that it's always interesting, though. When we were starting this community, which was back in 1989, and before we found this property, which is not owned by Ananda, but is owned by a group of investors, and it's been a symbiotic relationship all this time. We asked Swami how we should pray. It was an interesting answer. He said, don't keep asking God if having a community is a good idea. He said, self-evidently it's a good idea. Just ask Him to guide you and tell you how to do it. Which is sort of interesting, because sort of accepting God's will, sometimes you get kind of caught in that. Is what I'm doing really what you want? But you commit yourself to it, and you just, I mean, can't even answer that. I've been meditating on that quite a bit lately, just trying to sort of figure out that balance. Because once you feel what God wants you to do, you need to commit to it, but you can't commit to it in a pig-headed manner. You always have to be open to the fact that if He's going to guide you in another direction, you want to hear it. But you don't have to be so, well, just the way he put it. It's self-evidently a good idea. Do you want us to help people spiritually? Yes. Do you want us to be able to go deeper spiritually? I think so. I mean, these are the things that God says yes to. How can I serve? How can I serve? So I guess the question in the prayer would be, how can I serve? I wish to serve you. How can I serve? In this situation, yes, that would be the answer. How can I serve? We don't have to say, do you want a community? You just say, how can I serve? How can I serve your cause? How can I bring about the good things you want to bring into this world? It's interesting. He was very definite about that, though, and we've all remembered it. Okay, now, this one is on responding to a friend's angry letter. Now, this is not Swami responding to an angry letter, but this is one person saying, I got an angry letter from someone else, and I don't know how to answer it. How should I answer it? September 21st, 1998. You asked for my suggestions on how you should respond to so-and-so's letter to you. You might write a brief note thanking him for the friendship and concern that prompted him to write as he did. Where you yourself are concerned, say that these are things you sincerely want to work on in yourself, that it is not easy to change oneself, but that we are all living here primarily for that very purpose. So you begin by acknowledging that the intention behind the letter, at least one hopes, was sincere, and you admit that you're not perfect and you're trying to be better. On a more general note, You might say that this is one of the wonderful advantages of living in a spiritual community, that we get repeated opportunities to see ourselves through others' supportive but sincere eyes. This is divine friendship, and it is something one rarely encounters in the world, where everyone seems to want only to justify his own actions and character. Where blank himself is concerned, yes, the truth often is spoken in anger. But as Master said, anger leaves a residue of disharmonious vibrations, which in themselves are deleterious. Citing Master's admonition, add that you hope his anger leaves him, as you yourself feel only friendship and gratitude toward him. Tell him that you hope also that his outburst will serve as a reminder in his work with others not to lose his temper with them, but to speak always with their welfare, as well as that of Ananda in mind. Your letter should smooth things between the two of you and preserve that person's goodwill and friendship. Well, it's an interesting. Swami is being very, very specific. I can only imagine, I don't know this circumstance. I can only imagine that there was a lot at stake. I know on many occasions I've had to ask Swami how to respond to a difficult situation, of this type, where somebody is doing something that you know is not good for them, where you yourself are the target, for example, and it's sort of like, what is the right tone? How do we? Let me try to get this clear because it's really important. In my book, Swami Kriyananda as We Have Known Him, there's a story about personal experience I had back in the 70s with individuals who are not part of our world anymore, so their identities don't matter. It was decades ago. I was working in an administrative position, and I had, over the period of a couple of years, I had two different women who worked with me, both of whom were difficult to work with. I was not so easy to work with myself, but they were difficult for me to work with. And they both were willful and uncooperative, and I'm not just saying that was an objective fact. For different reasons, they were just hard to work with. They had a lot of their own agenda, and it was not always easy to make it work. So about the first one, I asked Swamiji, I said, what kind of feedback should I give her? How should I respond to her? Because she's unreliable and she's inappropriate a great deal of the time, and she's moody, and she's often, snappy in a way that she snaps at me in ways that are just like, it's not appropriate. I don't mean because I'm her boss. It's just not appropriate. This is Ananda. This is not the way we deal with each other. And I said, but I just am not quite sure what I should do, because if I really am as firm with her as I could be, I think she may get angry and quit. And she might get mad at Ananda altogether because I'm a symbol of Ananda. I was Swami's secretary at that time, I believe. And Swami's answer was, karmically, this woman is making up her mind as to whether or not she really wants to be on this path. She's making up her mind in a general sense about whether she wants to be a devotee at all. It's asking a lot of her, and she's trying to decide. She has the good karma to be drawn here, but her karma is not clear enough yet for her to really be ready to do what's necessary to be on this path. He said, be very strong with her, because she has to make up her mind. And so just make it clear to her, what's happening, meaning this is not appropriate, this is what you need to do, and let her make up her mind. Meaning, if she quits, that's fine. Now, the story that I told is interesting because I don't know how much time later, I had another assistant who was also moody and snappy and inappropriate and tended to be negative and was unreliable, a lot of the same qualities. In an ashram, you can't advertise and hire for talent. You have all your devotees and your brothers and sisters, and you find meaningful work for them, and we all get to work out our karma together. So I said to Swami, you know, here's this. And I presented what really on the face of it was exactly the same situation. He said, and I said, if I'm definite with her, I think she'll quit. He said, whatever you do, don't lose her. He says she belongs to this spiritual family. She's ours. And whatever you do, don't lose her. In other words, don't feed back to her as clearly as you could, because she won't be able to take it, but she does belong to us. And so her weaknesses, we have to adapt to her weaknesses. Isn't that interesting? He had the capacity to see the difference. An interesting fact about that person, just incidentally, was I was Swami's secretary, and that before that person moved to Ananda, that woman, female also, I delivered to Swamiji, I gave him the mail, which was one of the things we all got mail, physical mail in those days. I gave him this person's letter, this woman's letter. He held it in his hand. He did not open it. He held it in his hand and says, she belongs here. Yeah, just like that. She belongs here. And he later, you know, spoke of that. He knew just holding the letter in his hand that she belonged with us. And she's still with us in her own way. And she has been loyal. The path of her life has taken its own form, but she's remained absolutely faithful. But you see how different that is? And you know, one of the strongest principles, I was thinking about this the other day, one of the strongest principles I learned from Swami Kriyananda was, well, let's think of it, it's in the Bible. At the end of Jesus' life, Jesus says to God, in a prayer, he says, you know, I haven't lost any of the sheep. He said, except the one that chose to be lost. And that was a reference to Judas, because Judas separated himself out. But I haven't lost any of the sheep. I've been a good shepherd. And when Master went on his national tours lecturing spiritual campaigns, that's the word he used, his spiritual campaigns, he left Gyanamata in charge of Mount Washington, in charge of the ashram. And he wrote to her, and he said, I feel completely confident in leaving you because I know, and the word he used is you're a peacemaker. But there was more in it, and there was more in the letter, and I know that this is what he meant. And I can't conjure up the exact words. But he knew that she would not lose any of the sheep. That's what he meant by peace. She wouldn't get distracted by a detail and forget the point. The point is we are here for God, and we are committed. Guru is committed to our salvation. And I saw that with Swamiji many times. He would always preserve the relationship. Sometimes, I mean, it was very interesting. Sometimes if he wanted a stern message delivered, he knew someone needed to hear a stern message, he would often commission one of us to do it. Because, and I hope you understand this in the right way, we were expendable. It was fine if so-and-so became angry at me, because I wasn't his link to Master or her link to Master. I was a friend. I was doing my best. But I didn't go and say, Swami told me to tell you. In fact, very specifically not. I would just go and, if possible, find a way to present to that person an idea that Swami wanted them to be able to consider, but did not want to present it himself. Because there was a possibility if he presented himself and the person rejected it, they would then reject Swamiji, and the relationship would be lost. So he was always much more concerned about the forever relationship than whatever little foible was going on in the middle. And he would, you know, he would just and that was not in any way manipulative. It wasn't at all. It was considerate. It was exceedingly considerate. And then, even still, you know, I could say something or someone could say something, and so would become angry at it, but then they could appeal to Swamiji. And so then they could bring the issue to Swamiji, and then he could be very sympathetic, and often in his sympathy, they would suddenly listen. So, and I saw miracles happen. And I mean, he did the same with me. It wasn't like, he knew who we were in our hearts. And he had only one wish, which was to help us, period. And he would sacrifice anything for that. Any project could be sacrificed for that. We would try to accomplish things, but he would never sacrifice an individual for a project, ever, period, ever. It was always our spiritual welfare. That was the only project. Everything else was the means to an end. So he's explaining here, and obviously this person in this letter, I mean, this is the same situation that I have often brought to Swami. Sir, I got this letter. Sir, this person is asking this of me, and I can't figure out what the balance is here. Because, it's easy to just abjectly apologize. And Swami does give the person advice about how to apologize, what tone to take in apologizing. And then to remind the person of all these, that we're all in this together. You start by thanking them for their friendship, thanking them for their concern, accepting in principle that I have much to learn and that we're here to learn it and I'm grateful to be helped. I mean, all of that is very winning. And there's no accusatory tone at all. It's just one of gratitude, which is also sincere. I mean, should be sincere. It should be sincere, that I know you mean well and I'm grateful for your friendship. That's why we're here. There's a story about a certain saint, I don't know the context, and there was another person in the village who used to criticize him all the time. And then when that critic died, one of the disciples came and said, hooray, your worst critic has now died. And the saint began to cry. He said, my best friend has now died. He said he was the only one who would tell me the truth and tell me what I needed to do. Swami has jokingly said, when opprobrium, if that's the right word, would be heaped upon his head, Swamiji, criticism, because he had many people who loved him and then many people who didn't. That was just the way of the world. He said, he would laugh and he said, really, the people who are angry with me are helping me work out my bad karma. And then he would say to us, who were his friends, all you're doing is helping me use up my good karma. Of course, he was joking, but he wasn't. He was saying, this is what happens, and we have to take it. So he says, so anyway, Swami just gives her some positive things to say, but then he does. He gives this person permission also to correct the letter writer. And I mean, there have been times when Swami would not have given you permission to correct the letter writer, either because it wasn't good for you or it wasn't good for the letter writer. You would just accept it, and that would be the way that it would be. You would make no effort to teach, and that would be that. But in this case, Swami feels that the recipient of the letter needs to speak honestly about the danger of anger, and even further, to advise the person on how to behave. Interesting, because he wouldn't necessarily have said all of that, but he did. And so now we have an understanding of a possible response if we're going to think about it. Okay, let's see. This one is about overcoming a susceptibility to strange psychic phenomena. The letters, I mean, just keep turning the pages. And this was written in the late 1980s. And Swami says, without more complete information, it seems that your friend needs to strengthen his willpower and to get more closely in touch with the divine power within himself. Service and a giving outlook and attitude could help him very much to overcome this problem. So it's not the person writing it, but I need to help a friend and I don't know how to help them. I mean, it was so great to have Swamiji in the body, because you could just ask him about things that, like, who could you ask? You have a friend who's having a weird psychic phenomenon. Who do you ask? You could always ask Swamiji, and he answered his mail and he would tell you. So he says, I don't really, I'm just having to be general about this. From your description of it, what he has experienced does not sound wholesome. I love also, Swami just has, he understatement. He always understated, because it's better not to be excited. It's better, when you overstate, often it's confused. Does not sound wholesome. You see how just, Swamiji was always exact in his writing. I wrote letters for him for years, and I also put this in Swami Kriyananda, as we have known him. I put the instructions Swami gave me for writing letters. I'm going to say it for a minute here. And one of the very early instructions he gave me, I wrote, I would write his dictation, or he would give me a general idea, or I would write intuitively, compose a letter. Swami would review it, correct it, and then, approve it after a while. But I wrote, someone sent Swami some poetry of theirs. And I said, thank you so much for sending us your beautiful poetry. I was just, just writing words. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Swami says, it wasn't actually beautiful poetry. He said it was nice poetry, and I was happy to receive it. He said, what will you say when someone sends us beautiful poetry? Now that you've used up the word beautiful on poetry that is merely nice. Truth, you have to be absolutely truthful. That's the important issue. You've used up the word beautiful on poetry that was merely nice. You've completely demagnetized your speech because you haven't thought about your words. You've just thrown out a word rather than really having integrity. So I learned to write appropriately. I was happy to receive your poetry. I'm so pleased to see your creative efforts. It's always a good thing for a devotee to try to express himself. You just get around the issue and you say things that are absolutely, absolutely true, without a smidgen of exaggeration or extra drama. And then there is an integrity to everything you do. It's very, very important. Sometimes we just get really sloppy. We just throw words around, and then we wonder why we don't have any magnetism. So Swami says, from your description, what he has experienced does not sound wholesome. So we know exactly where Swami stands. He hasn't said, oh my gosh, evil, that's horrible. Well, this is not wholesome, what he's describing. And you've got the picture, but you see how clearly you have it? Oh, this is not wholesome. Whether it comes from the subconscious or from some astral entity is difficult to say at this point. But in either case, the above advice may prove helpful, which is to strengthen his willpower and to get more closely in touch with the divine power within him, service, and a giving outlook and attitude could help him very much to overcome this problem. Swami, he hasn't panicked. He hasn't really gotten terribly excited about it. He just goes through it like this. This is not wholesome. Now, is this just his imagination running wild? Because when psychic phenomenon happen, there is such a thing as possession. There is such a thing as disincarnate souls looking for a consciousness that is blank habitual, blank because it is habitually drunk, or drug deranged. Swami said that Master said, dark astral entities often hang around places where people are drinking, so that when they have obliterated their own consciousness, then the disincarnate entity can slip in, because people black out drinking. They lose awareness, and they've literally vacated their own minds, and then dark entities can get into them. It's very interesting. And dark entities who want back into a material body, but for some reason are trapped between the worlds because of their attachment. Such entities often are very evil, and it is not uncommon for someone to find themselves in jail, find themselves having been arrested for having committed some crime, sometimes even a terrible, violent crime, and they will have no recollection of it. And this can be probably because of alcohol or drugs. They lost possession of their own body, and some evil entity used it to do something it wanted to do, and then there you are. Now, and that is really, it is freaky scary. That's one of many reasons why you should not drink or take drugs, because it diminishes your control over your own body, literally. Now, we also shouldn't just sit around quivering all the time, just waiting for some disincarnate entity to come in, because it's not that common. And it's not that easy for an entity to take over your body, but it does happen. But just as often, or perhaps much more often, when people go into some weird state, it's really just their own subconscious mind. Entities do come in, but the subconscious mind also runs wild and just turns us into something that we didn't intend to be. Suppressed fears, past life memories, buried inclinations, just all kinds of odd and strange things. So, but it happens when we're not sufficiently engaged on a conscious, dynamic level with our own life as it is. We need to strengthen his willpower. And so the lack of willpower, the lack of commitment to my own life is what leaves us blank. If you're fully engaged in your own reality, it's not that easy. You can't just kick out the present inhabitant. The inhabitant has to give over control. But the giving over control can be habitual. It can be an habitual sort of lack of willingness to engage in my own life. I just don't want to put out the energy. Just dull and tired and subconscious most of the time. So you have to develop willpower. Whatever discipline you just stand wherever you are. I mean, Master also said, he put it like this. He said, there is such a thing as mass karma, but for example, he said, when a plane goes down and all the passengers are killed, he said, it may not have been the karma of every person to die. Some of them, however, may not have had enough karma to live to separate themselves from the group karma because they were habitually insufficiently engaged with enough willpower in their own life. So this is what Swami is suggesting. Also, because if this is not an entity, but is just the subconscious mind running, the person needs to get out of the habit of living subconsciously. And living subconsciously is not just being asleep. It's just letting things drift, not knowing where your own ideas are coming from, having no idea of what you really want or what you're going to do, but just letting the sort of the least energy force just come forward. And if that becomes habitual, then it just becomes habitual. We begin to live in a subjective dream world. It's mental unbalance. And the fight against that is, again, his willpower, doing everything with energy and commitment and calling on God. Swami tells in the path, he became interested in the idea of disincarnate entities, and he tells the story in the path of a dream he had. It was a superconscious dream that took him to a dark world. But he woke up in the night in his dream and realized it's time to meet a disincarnate entity. And then in his dream, he went to this room that was a very odd vibration, and he started hearing what he called was the opposite of the Om. He started hearing an Om sound, but with a dark energy. And then he became aware that another consciousness was coming there. But suddenly, the power of that darkness became so strong that Swami could feel that it was trying to take over his consciousness, and he wasn't sure he was stronger. And in that moment, he just called to his guru, "Master!" He said like that. Immediately the darkness went away, because darkness cannot stand in front of light. And so Swami realized, there's nothing to fear if you have that relationship with God. So strengthen your willpower, have a relationship with God, and expand your sympathies. Get out of yourself. If this is just coming from your subconscious, you need to come into the objective world, serve, have an attitude of service to others. This will give you a place to apply your willpower and will draw you into a commitment into this world, which will make you too strong in yourself for either your subconscious to take over or for another entity to come into you. So there we are.